Are Judaism and Zionism against each other? What's the reality here? Can you explain that for us?
Yes, with the help of the Almighty, first I pray to Him to bestow upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may be worthy of conveying His message to people who are going to be seeing this documentary with God's help. Basically, Judaism and Zionism, contrary to the popular belief, these two concepts, these two issues are totally diametrically opposite. Judaism is religion, subservience to the Almighty, accepting a covenant, and order that was given on Mount Sinai, while Zionism is a transformation from religion into a base material nationalism, have a piece of land. It's in essence void of godliness. It's a concept of a base want of similarity with all the other nations. Have an Olympic team, a strong military, and a national home. And it was created, this whole concept of Zionism was created not more than a little over 100 years ago by non-religious Jews. Peter Herzl, Jabotinsky, his name, a mentor of Begin, and there was Ben Gurion there, and then Chaim Weizmann, the first president, the first prime minister. So these were people who were estranged from religion. They detested the religion. They were openly opposed to religion. Theodor Herzl announced proudly in the newspapers that he's not circumcising his son, which is the basics of the covenant. Jabotinsky wrote in his writings that Jews who have beards, and this is called payas sidelocks, should not be able to vote in the national home, and that we carried all this, carried some documentation with us. We have to have a book called Historic Documents, and there's compiled traditional Torah opposition to Zionism historic documents that we compiled, and we have some of their writings, and that I mentioned, for instance, about Jabotinsky, that you were taken aback by. I mean, it should be, because it's really so wild, so outlandish, but he wrote it in the newspaper Chadoshos Haaretz in 1919. It was probably in Palestine, I gather. He wrote, in the national home, we will announce that those Jews who have on themselves the rust of Golos, that means exile, and they deny to shave off their beards and payas, will be second-class citizens who will not have the right to vote. There's a direct quote. But so before we get into all those facts, basically, this is what Zionism is about: the transformation from religion to base materialism, nationalism, and therefore, it's in essence, it's contradictory to what it means to be a Jew. Furthermore, the Jewish people, since the destruction of the temple, were expressly commanded by the Almighty not to attempt to return and create our own sovereignty. God foresaw there would be people impatient and wanting to have their own home, their own national home, and God warned us with a prophecy from King Solomon that is called Shir Hashirim, Song of Songs, where God expressly told us we will put on the three oaths. The Jewish people are on the three oaths since the destruction of the temple. One, not to return in mass in large numbers back to Palestine. Secondly, not to rebel against any nation. We have to be loyal citizens in every country residing. And thirdly, not to make any attempt to end exile. So the concept of Zionism, in its ideology, in its early stages, prior to its coming to fruition, it is totally contradictory to what it means to be a Jew. But once they've implemented they've established the state, now the state of Israel, now they're breaching the laws of the Torah, that we are not to make our own state. And this would be whether it would have been created the state of Israel in Uganda, which they originally were going to make. They had their plans to do it. or any other part of the world, it would be forbidden for Jews to even have 1 inch of sovereignty. It would, and it gets really compounded because they decided to go to Palestine, which is again another oath warning us not to return en masse to the land. And that would have been, if the land would have been uninhabited, it would be forbidden for us, and we would have opposed it as the rabbinical authorities around the world oppose Zionism, even if it would have been uninhabited. In other words, the land would have been not inhabited by the Palestinian people. We would still be dead set against this because it's a rebellion against God and forbidden for us. It just gets much more compounded, this, thousandfold, because when they decided to go to Palestine to create the state, so now they were basically trampling on the rights of the people, the indigenous people there, mostly the Muslim community, and there was a Christian community and a Jewish community. Now you're not allowed to steal. The Torah basics of Judaism is not to steal, not to kill, not to oppress the people. So the creation of this state of Israel, in every facet, is simply a rebellion against God, and really, it's astounding that the world has so easily accepted the fact that Zionists portray that they represent Judaism, the religion, and the Jewish people around the world, when any person, if he would just spend that little time and effort, and he will travel the world, or he will just make a research, you will find that every religious community, the more the religious, the more anti-Zionist, the more anti the state of Israel, whether it is in Quds, in Jerusalem, in the religious quarters, whether you will go to New York, where it's the second largest or the largest concentration of religious Jews. If you go to Williamsburg, that's right across from Manhattan, it is the greatest concentration of religious Jews there besides Jerusalem, and you won't find one Israeli flag hanging in that whole area, which we're talking about, basically miles square, and because these are very religious Jews, and therefore they just simply don't accept Zionism, and they really oppose it very strongly. And it's not they're lacking of religiosity or God-fearingness. It's simply because Zionism is a problem to the Jewish religion. Now, unfortunately, the world does not see that, does not hear that, and they've accepted for face value what Zionists say that they represent Judaism. It's tragic.
Okay, just let me tell him what you said.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No. You just keep on. Whenever it's needed, I will give you a cut.
Yeah.
You can just relax. میگه که قصه اینه که یهود ممنوعه که زمین داشته باشه. 3 قسمی که اینا خوردن که دیگه متحد نشد.
And then in fact, when the creation of the state, it's against the laws of the Torah that we're not allowed to return en masse, we're not to, so it's just, it's the ideology and in fact, and it gets compounded because you're not allowed to steal and kill. So I just want to make it to you because...
کامنت میکنم که خلاصه بشه. تقابل یهودیت و صهیونیسم تقابل دینگرایی با متریالیسم. اصلا سوم میگه که اصلا نیز دزدیدن و کشتن اینا ندارن، ولی داره تسخیر فلسطین میکنه. خب سال بعد هرتزل و اینها رو گفت آدم‌های بسیار بیدینی بودن، در حدی که حتی گفتن کسانی که این استریت میدن حق رأی دادن تو اسرائیل رو نداشته باشه. کاملا ضد دینی فتنه رو باشتن سال 4 رو بده باید در این کار نمیخواه بکنی.
Every religious community, the larger, the more religious, the more they'll demonstrate against Zionism. You can see tens of thousands of Jews. This is in front of the White House when Netanyahu came to Obama, and the Jews flocked from New York and just demonstrated. And this is in the U.S. and in Jerusalem you'll find the same thing. In fact, at a much greater level, you have tens and tens of thousands of Jews demonstrating. And this is a common phenomenon that they demonstrate because they're opposed to the existence of the state of Israel and everything that that just emanates from them. The only difference is that in the diaspora around the world, when we demonstrate, we thank God we're protected by the police. And in New York, although a lot of times the Zionists come and they attempt to attack us, but they can't because there's a policeman, who protect us. This is in Manhattan, by the way. But in Palestine, occupied Palestine, when they demonstrate, they're really brutally beaten every time. You find by every demonstration, you see that they're basically beaten, and nobody even reports this. This does not get seen on the, in the world media, and it's one of these mind-boggling things that this could be going on for years and years and years, and the world is silent. And here they're supposed to be protecting the Jews from the Muslims, and this is the protectors of Jews, and ironically, it happens to be that the Jews, when they were being attacked by the Crusades, way in history, or when they were being attacked by the Spanish Inquisition, by the Second World War, where did the Jews go? The Jews went to Muslim countries for protection. So it's just the opposite like Zionists protect. They beat the Jews, and the Muslims protected the Jews, and nobody shows this on the media.
لطفاً میگه که عکسایی که نشون داد میگه که ما هر جور اعتراض میکنیم صهیونیست‌ها میان ما رو میزنن. ما بودیم کشور اسلامی State of Israel.
Yes.
چی نوشتیم اجی؟ کنفرانس in 1897 in Bonn, Switzerland.
Basel.
Yeah, Basel. I can't read his handwriting. Tell us about that. Where did that idea come from?
Well, Zionism was not created as the Zionists want to, again, give this impression that in 1948 the state was created, and therefore, and the Arabs all of a sudden opposed it. No, they had this plan for, it would be around 130 years already, that Zionism was an ideology that they started thinking about, and then they had the first Congress in Basel, Switzerland, in 1897, and basically they sat and they planned. They were looking for a way of making a national home, and the different plans were broached. One was to go to Uganda to make the state, and was to go to Rochester and New York for some reason. I don't know what that was all about. Patagonia, next to Argentina. They really had plans to go to a fruitful, productive land, because that's what they wanted. They weren't interested in religion whatsoever. On the contrary, they were trying to further themselves as much as they could from this whole Judaism that was. So they wanted to go to different areas, but of course, the ones who, the practical minds, prevailed, because they said, we will never gain enough support to make a nation. You have to have massive amounts of money, massive support, and the only way that we will gain this is if it will be made in Palestine. Because if you go to Palestine, yes, you won't have such a lush and rich land, to be able to till the soil and so forth properly. But you will gain is the backing of the evangelistic Christians who believe that the Jews should be going up to the Holy Land, and ultimately there's different opinions. I mean, basically their belief is that the Jews and Muslims, God forbid, will murder each other out, or it will become, that's called Armageddon or something, and then it will convert to Christianity. Not everybody, and maybe a majority of the Christian evangelist Christians say that that's not why they want to assist the creation of the state in Palestine. They claim it's not because of that, simply they sympathize with the Jewish suffering. And be that as it may, and it was probably like that, people have good hearts around the world, but again, that is a flawed philosophy, because not only it doesn't assist the Jews when they're making their stand, because it creates anti-Semitism, but of course, it does what to the Palestinian people. It's ignoring all the Palestinian people's rights and so forth. And I forgot that you have to translate.
Okay. To have a state.
You just asked maybe the most poignant, the most, the most crucial, whatever question that needs to be asked, and it's really getting to the point of it. And that is a question that I think you have to come on to a spiritual answer, and which has been dealt with by the rabbis, because what you're asking is, if they detest the religion, just assimilate, like the ones who were Reformed Jews did. Reformed Judaism started like 100 years before Zionism, and it was Jews who said, they don't want to practice the religion, so they're going to assimilate. They're going to just mix amongst the nations. Yet they wanted to have the respectability of being in the Jewish communities also, so they created a new type of Judaism, reforming the Judaism. Again, what drove them is the same question: why couldn't they just assimilate, drop the religion? People don't want to keep their religion, but we believe that Satan, the Shatan, was driving them. That they decided to create a new type of Judaism, reforming the Judaism. I'm going back to reform, and so they gave themselves, they made themselves a rabbinate. They ordained their supposed rabbis, and they made synagogues, and they gave official laws. So like they only took what was convenient for them. And so we feel it was only the Satan that was driving them. But they wanted to have the cake and eat it, sort of. In other words, that they'll be respectable. That's why they'll have a rabbinate and they'll have synagogues. And yet they won't keep even the basics of Judaism, the Ten Commandments and all the rest. They won't keep. That was reform. 100 years later, these were the grandchildren of these Reformed Jews, the Zionists, and they said, assimilation didn't work, because basically there was still anti-Semitism. So even though they became doctors and lawyers, assimilated culture, these guys, people would get drunk in the bars and say, "You dirty Jew." So that was one of the reasons of basically. So Zionists said, what we do, we'll make our own national home. Now, so your question goes back to the same question. So just drop it. Become non-Jews. Why are you trying to stick, to a name Judaism? Our rabbi said it's the works of Satan. There is no other explanation. It's the Satan is trying to uproot the religion from Jewish people, and it uses different ploys. First, it made Reform Judaism, and then the Zionism. Zionism comes along and tells a Jew you can be a good Jew to God, and you don't have to keep the covenant. You don't have to keep the commandments. You just give your $1 to this state, to UJA, the United, and you'll be considered by God, and you save your soul. You buy your soul. So the rabbi said that don't think that they made that state and then they drove the Jews away from the religion. No, the whole purpose of creating this state is to uproot Jews from their maker, from their covenant. And this is what the greatest Rabbi Soloveitchik, Briskerov, these are great Jewish leaders, that it's the works of the Shatan. And that's why you see the success also, by the way, in the UN, that it was ratified. It makes no sense that they ratified it. How could you ratify a land that the majority was Muslims, and giving it to a minority to take over the land? It doesn't make sense. And it should be, the UN is supposed to be about democracy and not using religion to prevail over others, and here they call it a Jewish state, and yet it was ratified. It doesn't make sense. Like I'm saying, it's only the works of Satan that brought this.
That was my next question.
Yeah.
What is the history of Judaism against Zionism?
Yeah.
What path has it gone through?
Well, immediately when this movement started, that they sat together and had these meetings of making this Jewish home, the leaders of Judaism across the board, in other words, from Europe, in Sephardic countries, Middle Eastern countries, around the world, we call Ashkenazic Jews, Sephardic Jews, in other words, Jews from different parts of the world, they all immediately took up the most vociferous opposition, because the knowledgeable Jew, he understands that this is just contradictory to the Judaism, and as we've said, it rebels against God. God warned us that I put you into exile with the destruction of the temple, not because we were physically weak. We believe that if you look at the prophecies of Isaiah, Ezekiel, Jeremiah, all of them across the board, it says that the Jewish people, when we were taken into the Holy Land, God made a covenant with the Jews. You look at there's many verses, it says, God warns us, do not defile the land because it will reject you. It's like a body rejects a foreign object because it's a holy land, and you have to be on a special high level of holiness to be able to exist in the Holy Land. And it says, there's many verses that says, you should not defile the land, that it should, God should, that the land should not, as I say, reject you if you will defile the land. And it says, just like the nations tried, the Canaanites, that they served idol worship, and the land threw them out. So God warns the Jews, do not defile the land. And then, when the Jews went in, they accepted this, then they were not up to par in their holiness that it was supposed to be, because it's like more than the rest of the world, it's God's holy land. So the prophets warned the Jews that they will be sent into exile, and eventually the destruction of the temple, they were sent into exile. The Jews understood that this was not because of our physical weakness, because we didn't have phantom fighters, of course, those days they didn't have, but that not because we were physically weak, the destruction of the temple came about, and the Jews were driven from the land. It was purely because of our spiritual lacking. So the solution to that is not to create a state. The solution is to repent and that God should bring us back in. But any concept of returning prematurely and making a state, this is clearly not the solution to our exile. And it will not accomplish anything. Again, maybe short as you get it. The opposition is twofold. One, because the concept of Zionism is, it's not democracy like I explained before. Secondly, the opposition was because we were clearly under oath by God, do not return. That it's not acceptable to return. That's first of all. That the basis. And the history, basically, as soon as Zionism came about, the rabbinical authorities, as I was saying, let's just give the Chofetz Chaim, these are the leaders of Judaism that obviously, for a non-Jewish person doesn't know these names, but in any Jewish quarter, if you'll say the Rabbi Yisrael Meir Cohen, Cohen is Kamnea, we had a Cohen here, but the Cohen means a priest, and that's the name given to the people of the children of Aaron. And he was one of the greatest leaders of Judaism, a codifier of the Jewish law. He was from 1839 to 1933. He passed away before the state. And he wrote in his writings, and I'm quoting him, "The Zionists are dead limbs of our people which cause the entire body to rot." Because they understood that Zionism has nothing to do with the religion, and so explained that it doesn't accomplish anything for the Jews. It's just uproots the religion from the Jews. So you ask me the history of all the leaders in Europe. They basically ostracized the Zionists. My mother, she's an older lady. She lived to 120, and she remembers them. She says that in Poland, and when anybody, a person's child would become a Zionist, they would basically mourn them like they were dead, because they knew that, in other words, these are rebels who are leaving the religion. Zionism was accepted. If a person became a Zionist, it's basically they're leaving the religion. It's not that they're Jews who are not practicing, but they're basically rebelling against God, and that's what they were. They were people who threw away the yoke of God. In the beginning of the Zionism, when they started going up to Palestine, they started creating kibbutzim. Kibbutz, maybe you've heard the name kibbutz. Kibbutz means to gather in, basically, and they would make these settlements. What we call today settlements is kibbutz. They would gather in, but they would gather, so it would mostly be the youth. Boys and girls would gather there with total lack of morality. Everything would happen over there. And so for the youth, it was great. They people who are rebellious youth Here they found an opportunity that they could go to some type of a safe haven or something, place away from the parents, rebel against the parents, rebel against the community, and they'll be given respect for what they're doing. And they'll be, not only that, but they'll be heroes because they're creating this Jewish state, right? And yet they don't have to have any responsibility. They lived a life like animals. They didn't have to, answer to God. Not the concept of kosher, like I say, morality. They mixed boys and girls. This is a fact. It can be checked. This was a vast majority of these kibbutz and settlements that they would till the land and build the land. So this was the history of Zionism, and they were basically ostracized from all the communities. There was very few that were considered religious Jews, religious Zionists. Later, after the Second World War, was when basically they would put their tentacles into the communities because the Jews were murdered at such an extent. Most of the leaders were the first murdered, as is the policy, like Stalin, or the first thing when you have a despot, a leader, is the first thing he kills the educators, the teachers, the educators, and that's what they did. The Jews were leaderless, so the Zionists were able to then gain a foothold in the Jewish quarters. After the Second World War, there were many Jews in refugee camps, and they were waiting for countries to allow them to come in. And Zionists used their power to manipulate that they should be taken to Palestine. And they also had the Balfour Declaration, they had whatever, that they were able to distribute land. So they promised these people that they're going to give them land, and at the same time they closed the opportunities to go to other lands. And this is documented. Alan Hart wrote about this from England, and there's many writings about how they did it, which they do till today. When the USSR disappeared, they also put pressure. Jews wanted to go to Germany and different places to live because it was, good economy and so forth, and they put pressure on these countries not to accept them. And just this year, in Yemen, there's problems. There was these, what's happening there. So there was lawlessness, and there's a very tiny, small Jewish community. So they were afraid of them for their lives, and we in the United States offered to take these Jews in to help them get settled. And the Zionist state of Israel openly said, they're Jews, they belong to us, as if everybody belongs to them because they're Jews, and they wanted to force the issue that they should be taken into Israel. And this is the policy that they had. So this was after by the Second World War, that they put pressure to have the Jews go into their to the state of to Zionism, to the state of Israel. At that time, before it was ratified, even it was right after the Second World War, and at the same time. So they did it by giving them a candy, promising them land, closing off the other opportunities, and also they kept on saying to the Jews, "You see what happened? You listened to your rabbis, and the rabbis said you shouldn't join Zionism, and look what happened to you. You were murdered. Your family was murdered. Come to us. We're going to create a state that we're going to protect ourselves." And they counted on the ignorance of Jews that having gone through the Second World War, and this fear that they're going to want to accept this false protection, make our own country, we'll have our own national home, it will protect us. So on different facets, the fact that they gave them land, the fact that they closed off the other opportunities, and the fact that they kept on saying to them, "You see, listen to your rabbis, look what happened to you." That's what happened, the Holocaust happened. And in other words, you didn't have a protection. Nobody wanted to protect you. We're going to protect you, come to us.